This episode is brought to you by Tarkine. Tarkine produces the world's most eco-friendly, high-performance running shoes. Along with this, they take responsibility for the full life cycle of their shoes. Tested on elite runners, suitable for anyone who cares about the planet, comfort and style. Tarkine. #RunTheFuture. Now available at tarkine.com. Use code RTPodcast for 10% off your first order.
G'day guys, my name's Dan Wallis, and on this episode of the Runners Tribe podcast, my guest is Mathew Mildenhall, performance physiologist at High Performance Sport NZ. Now Matt's story is an interesting one, given that prior to his current role, he was for many years an elite athlete himself. A massively talented junior, Matt went on to run for the University of Villanova, where he was a two-time All-American in track and cross-country. Matt had success under three very distinct running philosophies, and given what he now knows about the science of training, we were able to talk through some of the key differences during his career as an athlete. We go through his junior years under the Auckland-based Lydiard system, training with heart rate in college, and then utilising a more refined physiological testing protocol post-collegiately. We cover quite a bit in this conversation, so I've included a couple of links in the show notes that might be helpful. As always, I hope you enjoy the conversation and can take something positive away from this one for your own running and training. So without further delay, here is my conversation with Matt Mildenhall. Like how would you describe yourself now? Like, what's your official role?
Yeah, so my role currently is as a performance physiologist and technique analyst with High Performance Sport New Zealand. So I work across several sports, mainly in sprint kayak as a performance physiologist with a little bit of more performance analysis, analysing sessions for stroke rate, speed, etc. On the performance side, and then obviously the internal measures of things like heart rate, lactate, VO2 as a physiologist. For endurance athletics, I'm performance physiologist there, and then also doing a little bit of performance analysis for boxing as well, which is a little bit different, but was a really fascinating thing to dive into just before Tokyo. So I kind of cover a few different things, bit of variety amongst my role, but it's been really, really awesome.
So who were you focused on mostly? Because I mean, kayak, boxing and endurance, for someone like me, I look at that and think, okay, that's pretty broad, but what were you focused on mostly with Tokyo? Was there any particular emphasis? Yeah. So obviously my role in kayak was just preparation for the team as a whole. So men's and women's squads in their daily training environment, analysing training data, recovery, wellness, all that sort of thing, doing physiological testing in the lab and in the field for 4 years leading up to Tokyo. My role in athletics was a bit more nuanced. It was more around the preparation for the hot and humid climate that was anticipated to be there. Obviously, that shifted a little bit with the move to Sapporo, but there was still a lot of emphasis around acclimation and acclimatization for heat, and then just cooling and nutrition strategies to enable our marathon and race walkers particularly, but all the way down to the 5K with Camille Buscombe, just to make sure that they were ready to perform when they hit Tokyo or Sapporo. With boxing, it was just a really cool side project that I ended up getting involved in with David Nika, who is bronze medalist in the heavyweight division. So he, two-time Commonwealth Games gold medalist, and we decided to try and dive into some competitive analysis for him. So it was a little bit of a curveball, a little bit of a right turn, so to speak, for me, but a bit of a fight sports fan. So no, it was pretty awesome to get involved in that, and obviously he did really well
Actually, all the sports did reasonably well at the game, so it was a pretty cool thing to be involved in. And then, just to finally finish that thought off, I actually was in the satellite village up in Sapporo, providing performance physiology support and as a team lead for our marathon and race walkers up in Sapporo. So, had quite a few fingers in quite a few pies leading into and going to the games.
I hadn't actually thought about kind of going too deeply into this, but I am curious when it comes to working out heat protocols and I'm talking about the endurance athletes now, like the marathon runners, where does someone like yourself and the team at High Performance Sport, do you look at what other countries are doing, or do you start straight from the literature and figure out your own methods?
Yeah, so we had quite a few years to get ready. That was one of the great things that High Performance Sport did when they found out that Tokyo and Rio as well, which was anticipated to be hot, and was on some days, not on others. But there was a major emphasis on heat. So we've had quite a few years to, I guess, as you mentioned, just leaf through the literature, get a good understanding of what research is actually suggesting around protocols and how to design acclimation or reacclimation, and what's best in terms of sauna versus hot water immersion, being in the natural environment versus being in say a heat chamber. So we had all of that stuff, but we've also called on international experts as well. So it was a good mix of both. And by the time we got there, I was even learning when I got there, just around being exposed to the Australian team, which were fantastic when we got into Sapporo, the Canadian team and the likes. Just watching and learning right till the start gun.
So is it a matter of, because you don't want to overwhelm the athletes. They already know it's going to be hot. Mm-hmm. You've got a insane amount of, like you said, kind of background knowledge. Was part of that distilling that down to key bite-sized basic things that the athletes could do?
Actually, surprisingly, it was more whittling back the amount of heat in certain times that a lot of the athletes were trying to bring in their preparations, and just being able to focus. It's another stress that you need to bring into your already loaded training schedule, especially for a marathon or a race walker. So it's about finding those opportunities where we can integrate it in whilst balancing the overall load or stress of training, life, and when you're bringing in the environmental stress of heat and humidity. So it was about creating something that was manageable, would get the job done, and then also allow athletes to train, because you have to put in the miles, you have to put in the work to be ready to go and compete at the Olympics first and foremost. If you're not fit, you're not going to go well. And then we can really think about the heat on top of that and how that plays in. So it was actually quite interesting. Like, at the end of the day, it is pretty simple what you need to do. Expose yourself to the environment that you're wanting to compete in. Do it for a certain amount of time that you'll get the adaptations you need. Make sure that you have the nutrition plan honed in, the cooling plans honed in, which just takes some trial and error leading in. But it was actually quite surprising how, I guess, it wasn't a constant thing throughout. It was, all right, we're going to a heat camp here or there. This is when you'll bring it in prior to the taper or before your last major sort of phase, training phase leading into your taper. How do we bring you into a pre-camp? When can we trial some of the things? So there was a lot to do, but it was pretty basic around those three themes: acclimation, cooling, nutrition, hydration, and then just actually, wasn't as much as a lot of people anticipated. Just choosing the right times.
We could spend an hour on that, but we're not going to, because I have something else I want to talk to you about. But it involves, speaking of training plans, preparation. One of the things I want to do is I kind of want to rewind and go back, because I think it gives a lot of context too. I mean, you're working in this world of high performance sport. But the big difference is you were a successful, amazing athlete yourself. And we're talking about different types of training. Like I kind of said offline, I see your training being broken up into about, pre-college, college, and post-collegiate. And I want you to just kind of work through and give us some examples of the kind of different approaches you've taken. And because you were successful in all three of them, you were a phenomenal junior, you were All-American at Villanova, and then you went quite a different, took a different approach, and that still was amazingly successful. So can you run us through kind of some of the different approaches?
Oh, thank you first and foremost, Dewall. That's very flattering. But yeah, no, man, I think you broke it down perfectly. Like when you did mention that offline, I hadn't really realized. But yeah, you can kind of break my journey up, I guess, into the three distinct stages. So yeah, was a runner. Still dabble every so often. If you challenge me to 3 weeks before a marathon, whether I can do it or not, have been known to line up on the start line. So yeah, still a true fan of running and endurance sport as well. But yeah, running was my thing right up until probably the age of 25, 26. And yeah, training from an early age, probably broke all the generalist sport specialization rules that you hear out there in the science and in the public. So yeah, I was running a decent amount as a junior, very Lydiard-based kind of background. Well, one of my major influences, my coach through high school, Don McFarquhar, he was actually Peter Snell's training speed buddy, especially in the summers. They would do the 100-mile weeks and go hit the track, and Don was apparently quite nippy, quite toey, so he could actually take Sir Peter Snell to the line in any speed work. But yeah, that period of my life was very basic. It was building up volume, low intensity, a little bit of dusting of sessions, time trials, as Lydia had loved, and then just learning how to race, exposing myself to different racing scenarios and learning the skill of racing. It was really successful, and was managed to secure a scholarship to Villanova, which was really an awesome period of my life, and was under the guidance of Adrian Blinko and Marcus O'Sullivan. Adrian I actually work with now at High Performance Sport, but also just surrounded by a bunch of really, really talented but also hardworking athletes. And I mean, your listeners would be familiar with a couple of the names on the team with me, with the likes of the legendary Matt Gibney, the man, Geordie Williams, Sam McEntee, and then
Carl McKenzie.
Carl McKenzie, Hugo Beamish, whose brother now is New Zealand indoor 3K record holder. And obviously Sam, and I was just there for I think one semester when Pat Tiernan joined the team. So it was a really cool period of oceanic teammates that went through Villanova with me. And yeah, that was a really cool experience. Marcus, very chill, great coach, in terms of you're not overcooking you, really making sure the race schedule wasn't packed, concentrating on overall development. Adrian, obviously leading from the front, being a professional athlete, breaking the New Zealand record when I was at Villanova, I believe. But yeah, far more emphasis on, increased emphasis on science. So through things like the lactate threshold testing, and we did a lot of work at tempo, intensity, or just below that second lactate threshold, ventilatory threshold, and then that kind of dipped my toe into the science, got me really interested in actually what all this physiology talk, so to speak, was all about. and had some really good success, but also it was a bit of a rocky road at Villanova, to be honest. Going from running 3:42 one season to not being able to, or struggling to break 4 minutes in the 1500 the next season, going from All-American and cross country to sort of last guy on the team. So it was just, there's a rocky road, ups and downs, and just wanted to, really just spark some questions in my head. Why? Why is this happening? Doing the same training, getting different responses. What's going on? And then that led me to one of probably the most influential people in my career, Shannon Grady, who, performance physiologist, at the time was working with Tennessee women's squad, who had, I think, 4 or 5 girls. Just, it seemed like the whole roster was under 2 minutes for the 800, or breaking NCAA and world records. So it was great to get to know her, because she was actually our massage therapist, and she cured the hundreds of Achilles tendonitis issues that people were having because of the running on the snow and the ice up in Philly area. And just got talking to her, and after I graduated, just got really interested in keeping in touch with her, and she started coaching me and introducing me to physiological testing and how it can be used to actually individualize training. And that just led me to go and look into further study. Just through her coaching, through her guidance, and I still talk to her regularly today. Have since gone on to get a master's, get into the world of exercise science, and start working with our elite athletes. So it's great to have that experience, kind of from a junior, not really know what I'm up to, just running, all the way through to being very, very sciencey and trying to understand how to implement that into a training program.
You got a bit more. You're probably doing a lot of physiological, scientific, sound training in high school without really knowing, what the label was. I remember at Villanova, you guys had a reputation of, I was able to obviously, come see it. You guys came out to Colorado, but you guys seem to train smarter rather than harder all the time. And that was something quite foreign to me at the time, to seeing you guys doing your mile reps all at different paces, because you weren't even looking at paces, you were looking at heart rates. And that was the first time I'd become exposed to that. And there's that kind of reasonably famous now lecture that Marcus gave, where he was talking about his history of, he was going to retire. He started training with heart rate, and then it kind of completely influenced his career. And he talked about pushing the line up rather than pulling it up in terms of fitness. He's famously referring to Hugo in his talk, even though he doesn't say it. It seems like you had a similar experience. You got a bit of a taste of the science, like you said, and you moved into working with Shannon. Can you tell us a bit about exactly the kind of testing you would do with her, and how you think athletes, could get some more insights and fitness from that?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I was definitely, particularly with the 80-20 model, polarized training, which is coming out, concerning sort of how elites train. That was definitely how it was in my junior years. It was, you run hard some days, a couple of days a week, and then you run long and reasonably slow, or comfortably, conversation pace was a big one. The talk test, and just build volume. Like I was running singles upwards of 90 minutes during the week, and then up to 2 hours on the weekend. So you just staple running some strides, and that was about it. A couple hard sessions. Moving into Villanova, with that kind of understanding of the value of building volume slowly, and just not knowing when to go slow, knowing when to go fast, knowing when to go hard, and then Marcus brought in this concept of threshold training and heart rate based training, particularly around that second threshold, and it was really interesting. Yeah, good old threshold.
Threshold.
And it was great. And I mean, it was a new stimulus for me, and I off the bat ran amazingly. Off of sort of I remember my first year there was terrible. I injured, glandular fever, just all the things you don't do in freshman year, I did them. And didn't run the first year. Dio's smiling because he knows the backstory. But within 6 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks of getting back into it, ran a PB in the 1500, basically just off of threshold and a little bit of VO2 work. And then, next cross-country season, All-American, basically just off of threshold with a little bit of VO2 work. And it's like, there's something here. This is amazing. And then, it was the ups and downs over that. So you're right, Dio. We did train a lot at that heart rate and that threshold, but that kind of got me thinking, particularly about Marcus's story. And we love that story, and it's a great story. But also, don't forget, he had run pretty damn well up until that point, off of probably a mix of some threshold, but he was doing some hard work, getting in some good volume, 100-mile weeks and that sort of thing. And not to say that that's the magic number, it is kind of inbred in us as runners. That sort of is a sign of volume. So it's just interesting to look back on his story and my story and my first year. Yeah, it was fantastic. And I just think, it was a novel stimulus, and he also had that novel stimulus later on in his career. So it is something that has been playing around in my mind a bit around his story, and around my experiences with threshold base training. And so then moving forward to, I guess I'm sidetracking there, but moving forward to Shannon's stuff, which is the same sort of testing that you would get in any sort of physiological lab, just an incremental step test. But one of her big things is wanting to make it accessible to the wider public and bring it out of the lab and into the field, so it's not as scary. You're not hooked up to gas analyzers and you're on a treadmill when you're not really used to it, and you're kind of going to max, to fatigue. And I know it can be a scary place, and or just can bring up some senses of anxiety around those sorts of tests. So she's great. She's created a protocol that can be done on the track or on a treadmill, and just primarily using lactate measured after a rep, incremental increases in speed, and finding those heart rate zones that you can use submaximally, and then just extrapolating out to get some of the training paces that you can use above threshold for your VO2 max, your anaerobic type sessions above, or race pace sessions above VO2 max for some of those middle distance athletes. I think system based training, Go Athletics is her thing, and she's just been a pretty awesome starting point for me and a mentor. And since then, it's a lot of the same stuff that I'm using in the lab with our athletes. It's thresholds and understanding VO2 max and your capacities, what's your anaerobic capacity, and then using that data to try and fuel or feed into training programs, working out weaknesses, working on areas of improvement. Did your last training phase improve where you wanted to improve it? And what are the metrics that we can look at to see if that did or did not happen?
That kind of brings us then on that journey quite nicely back to your work now. It sounds like what you're describing almost sounds like using that data a bit like how a cyclist would train. Today is at this zone, tomorrow is at this zone. You watch Froome staring his power meter the entire time, and I know that's not always, the way you necessarily would want to train, but do you see running moving in that direction as almost a bit more scientific, like cycling?
Yes and no. And I think it's always, it's another one of those areas that you can individualize. Some athletes will respond really, really well to staring at their power meter. I know I was someone, obviously, through my journey that by the end of my career, I was really interested in understanding, where my heart rates were, what was my speed to heart rate relationship, how's my RPE kind of floating in and around that, like, are they disconnected? Heart rate's elevated, speeds are down, not feeling that great, or heart rate's suppressed. Those are the sorts of things that I really took a lot of enjoyment out of understanding for myself and how I was applying myself to my training. But I know a lot of athletes that just don't enjoy that. They do it for another reason. So it's about being flexible in how you prescribe that training for them. You can still bring in some of the physiological variables and measures to try and make sure, as a coach particularly, or as a practitioner from my standpoint, kind of feeding information back to the coaches and the athletes. How do we work with how the athlete enjoys doing what they're doing, but also still allow ourselves to feed information back to the coaches and athletes so they can make evidence-based decisions down the line. So I think in some respects, I've seen plenty of runners that are definitely sciencing it up, or more able to palate and have an appetite for that. And others just want to get to work and just hit their Ks, hit their volume, do the sessions that their coach prescribes, and then go over beer after training. Keep it pretty old school, and they pride themselves on that, and that's totally fine. It just depends on who you are as an athlete, how your coach wants to interact with it, and interact with the science. And then, how do we make sure that we can get the data we need, or your coach thinks they need, to be able to inform their practice whilst you as an athlete still enjoy what you're doing. So, in some senses, yes. In some senses, no, which is fine.
It's never clear, is it? It's never anyone listening to this wanting some clear yes or no answers on how to train, how not to train, what to measure, what not to measure is probably going to be disappointed. But that leads me towards something we talked about the other day. When we were 17, 18, whatever it was, and the Big Mzungo comes out, it was a CD, DVD. It wasn't, it's actually a CD stuck to a magazine. And we got this brief insight into how elites train. We weren't using social media in that way back then. And like I said to you, the amount of times I heard people quoting the one percenters and who were throwing medicine balls around because of that, and we didn't really know what we were doing with these 1%ers, and they're probably actually more like 0.1%ers. But when an athlete comes to you, or they're in the program with High Performance Sport New Zealand, what is it that you guys are looking for? How do you filter through some of the noise of marketing and modalities that aren't necessary? What is it that you guys are looking for that actually provides a higher return on investment and not a diminishing point of returns?
It's a great question, and
it's pretty loaded, but
no, it's all good, man. Like I just smile because I remember sitting in the back of our team bus watching the Big Mzungo before running it. I think it was like the Cavalier or Invite at UVA, and having an absolute blinder because all I could think of was, what was that quote? Like, I'm nervous. Everyone's nervous.
Salon. You're nervous. Everyone's nervous.
What a legend. No, just, and you're right. Like, I mean, particularly our cohort going through college, like, we were looking for the thing that, as a Kiwi, as an international athlete, you go in, this is to college, and this is your opportunity to be professional, or as close to, you're funded through college, you got your scholarship, you've got your academic stuff that you just need to take care of, but that's about it. You've got access to some phenomenal facilities that you don't have access to in New Zealand, phenomenal competition as well. I remember when I ran my 5K PB, I think I got like 20th in the race, and Laui Lalang opened up with like a 13:30 5K, I think his first ever race in America, and just blew us all apart. But, we are starting to get that sort of caliber in New Zealand, and I know Australia has had that for a while now, quite a bit faster than that. But it's just for us to go over there, it was pretty awesome to go and be able to try everything, and try and get as good as we could be in that sort of 4 to 5 year period of time and see if we could make it after that. But you're right, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot that just gets thrown at you, and particularly in this age of social media with also the ability to look into what the elites are doing. And you mentioned Jake and Zane. When you were interviewing Zane, how he got his hands on Hashim Al Garouge's training and how hard that was back in the day. But nowadays, I just reviewed a paper that, or just read a paper on middle distance training and the sort of trying to transition or bridge the gap between coaching practice and science. And looking through the reference list, it was just, pages of different athletes, different elite athletes' training diaries. So just the prevalence of the sort of information and the accessibility is huge. And we do have, so back to what I do now and how we kind of decipher through the noise, it's on an individual basis. Obviously, we have, like I said, you have very different athletes, very different coaches, different programs that I interact with across boxing through to sprint kayak, and it's important to understand what their intended goals are, who the athlete is that we haven't sent in front of us, what the coach's philosophies are, and the like. And then, my job is to go through all of the research and try and find those 1%ers to be applied, or what is be able to differentiate between noise and actual substance. So that's why we do, and I work across an integrated group of nutrition, physiology, biomechanics, S&C, psychology, and we're just constantly going through and questioning and asking and posing thoughts and ideas and seeing if testing it on ourselves to see if it works or not. That kind of leads me to my inevitable point is. It's just I really firmly believe in research. Evidence is kind of three-pronged. So you have the literature as the first level, so going out there and seeing what is out there, and seeing what randomized controlled trials are doing, what meta-analysis is saying in this area, or looking correlational studies and to get a good idea of what's going on, determine its performance, all that sort of stuff, give you a good picture. Then the next level is what's the coach and what are you seeing in the environment? How do these things apply to your environment on a group level, on a training group level? Like I said, we're constantly trialing it on ourselves as a trained cohort, and then seeing if there's something there, and then applying it to, or bringing it to the coach to potentially apply to our group. And then the final level is actually who is the athlete that we have in front of us. Are they, you bring in, sort of, as an example, strength and conditioning, and, good, robust evidence that, heavy compound movements could have a really significant effect on some of the areas, some of the determinants of performance in endurance, running, cycling, and the like, whether it's improved economy, etc. So, but you have an athlete that just says, I just feel absolutely shit after I lift, and we've done it now for a few months, and we've periodized it properly using the S&C and working with it around our training and using the evidence to sort of concurrently organize our training. But it's just not making me feel faster, or I'm not getting the benefits. And that's, to me, just as robust as papers. You have to have all three sort of levels of evidence to be able to go through and actually say, this is something that's applicable here. And it does take time, it does take effort to be able to weed through all of that and go through the different levels of evidence. But it's a really important role that I can play for our athletes and our coaches across the sports, just to be able to, help them navigate that sort of scenario.
And it's all layered, right? It's all level. So someone listening to this thinking, I've got good solid training, really happy with that. Well, then, maybe the next step above that is bringing in some S&C, that kind of thing. But as we were talking the other day, I've been lucky enough to see on a day-to-day basis the way someone like Mo Farah trains, and he's got access, to British athletics, high performance sport equivalent behind him. Yet the main things I noticed were he runs a lot, he's in the gym a few times a week, and he sleeps as much as he can. And that didn't sound like much of a, you're expecting to see all these Normatex and massage guns and supplements and things, but it was pretty basic. Is that where you start? You can't bring in that other stuff without starting from those big building blocks. Is that what you guys look at first?
Yeah, definitely. And so a lot of times we will get athletes coming into our sort of into our program of sorts. So, each program is different. So like we're in a centralized model with the kayak crew, and then our endurance crew are decentralized. By that, I mean, they're all around different coaches, different groups, training groups, or, spaced around the world, with the Robertsons in Africa. You have a couple in Australia. Malcolm Hicks was in London for a lot of his build-up, or for the majority of his build-up into the games. So, yeah, you're working in different scenarios and settings, but we overall will get the athlete quite late. They've already well established. So, yeah, it's about just kind of getting understanding of who they are, what sort of their training environment is, and then seeing where we can move the dial forward if a 1%er applies. But yeah, a lot of times, we will look, are the big foundational rocks in there, the big building blocks, the 80%, the big gains, so to speak. So, when we talked about this the other day, it made me remember a concept that Stephen Sealer presented on his kind of hierarchy of needs, of endurance needs. And it was really cool for me to go back, just kind of based off of Maslow's hierarchy. You have to kind of have the initial building block before you can kind of move up the pyramid, so to speak. And it was really cool to go through that because it does come down to some pretty basic stuff. First and foremost, a decent amount of volume, tolerable volume. Obviously you're not wanting to go into overtrained states or non-functional overreaching states or overreaching states for too long. Then you pepper in or bring in some intensify. So build volume, then intensify, and think about your training intensity distribution and some monitoring around your training, your recovery, your wellness, some metrics like HRV for autonomic recovery, and understanding of your kind of adaptability to training of sorts. And then you just get to work, and then we can start thinking about bringing in other things, like I was saying with Tokyo, an emphasis on heat because of the requirements of the event you're kind of about to go into, or hey, can we hone in on your nutrition now that we've got access to a full-fledged nutritionist, around marathon, especially in the heat, where carbohydrate utilization is increased, or how do we replenish some of those things quicker through recovery modalities. So yeah, but at the end of the day, you kind of got to train, you got to put in volume, you've got to bring in some intensity, you've got to periodize from general to specific to work towards a goal. And that's where we kind of start. And then we can, once those things are set, I think of Lisa Carrington, or Dame Lisa Carrington now, and knowing her training over the last several cycles, there are some pretty basic things that she's done, and the areas that she's improved on, are just basic things, 1 or 2 things a year or a cycle that she's focused on. So, Big Gordy always says her coach of the decade from the Hellbergs, pretty smart guy, 2-time coast-to-coast champion. Big rocks. He always talks about big rocks. Let's not get distracted by the small stuff. We've got to get the training done, and then we can start to think about the small stuff. And it's really, seeing the success of that program, and particularly Lisa, it just makes me realize you just got to get the work done. and put in the metrics around it to make sure it's working. I totally agree with that. Things we're big proponents of: heart rate variability, wellness monitoring. We track sleep, basically, but we do. We're making sure that we're checking in with the coaches every week just to make sure that people are on the right track. But at the end of the day, she's getting out there and doing hard work.
I like what you said about what he said about not getting distracted, because it's one of the reasons I got off social media, Instagram, but if you went on there, you'd see 1,000 different athletes doing 1,000 different things. And it's so easy to be overwhelmed with, I better do this fucking stretching routine because they are in 30 minutes of these bullshit drills because this group is, it's not that there's not some value to some of that, but I really like what you've said about doing the basics, measuring them, HRV, wellness scores, but the big blocks, the basics, and then slowly, I guess there's no point doing 30 minutes in the Normatec if you're going to miss out on 30 minutes sleep, right? So there's certainly a hierarchy.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. No, and I've experienced myself. It's so easy to get distracted with your core routine, and you just add an extra exercise on each week, and suddenly you're doing 60 minutes of core. And at the end of the day, it's energy that you're going to need to refuel. And could I have got the same actual outcome with a lot less? And that's where, having a great team around you. I know your interview with Brad Bear, he mentioned, having a good team, finding those good people that you can trust, that you can turn to, because as an athlete, you can't it's hard to wear. It's hard to wear the nutrition hat, the physiology hat, S&C, physio, and conversely, I know it can be expensive for kind of everyday runners to bring in a nutritionist and that. But physio, particularly a good physio, doctor if you need it, your coach, knowledgeable people that you can call on that can help you weed through the distraction. And I think one of the most pertinent things that I've taken from my my role and my experience over the last 4 or 5 years is one of the key characteristics of high performing athletes is a lot of the really good ones, they question. They want to know the ins and outs. They want to say, well, if you're going to make me do this, why? Answer me why. But at the end of the day, or once they've asked their questions, once the plan is being talked through, it's go time. It's just, all right, this is the plan, and we're just following it through, and we'll debrief at the end of the year. We'll debrief consistently throughout, but the plan is the plan, and we're just going for it. And I think that's something that I think a lot of athletes can do or can bring into their daily practice, no matter what level you're at, is you find your team, question, figure out what works for you, do all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, trust the process, trust the plan, trust the people you have around you, and just get to work. And don't get distracted along the way, because how many times have you seen guys or girls, after a good build-up, have get distracted and go off course, or just before a race, change up their shoes or change up their nutrition last minute. Stick to the plan, figure out the plan at the start, and then just execute it.
Well, mate, on that note, we've just scratched the surface, haven't we? I think we could probably do a million of these going through different things. But on that, I'm gonna thank you for your time, and we'll have to have you back, because I think there's quite a few things we could go through and pull apart there. But I want to thank you again. Thanks so much for spending 3/4 of an hour with me, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Oh, mate, you're welcome, and it's good to see you, bro. It's good to touch base again.
Awesome. Cheers.